Teal dear, let's have a bit of a thinking out loud session today just for fun. Not to try to claim some, hey, here's a definitive argument and position on a thing, just a little something to activate those almonds, promote a little bit of thought, and just make people consider their own points of view in a new way, and also link a little bit of history to the modern era. Not all that long ago, I did a video looking at the history of women in mining in the UK, and the scandal that erupted from a single woman found working topless and a few others in trousers down in the depths of the mines. Obviously this was actually quite practical given the jobs that they had, namely hurriers for coal wagons, which entailed them crawling often on hands and knees uphill underground with a wagon of coal tied behind them with a chain and body harness. Obviously this was hot and sweaty work, the solution to which was simply stripping off at the time, and of course this work could really not be done in full skirts and whatnot, so trousers were a must as a solution to the problem of excessive lengths of cloth hanging around you and all of the problems that that would cause. So the scandal was this one topless woman and a few in trousers, which prompted one Lord Shaftesbury to create an act in Parliament which passed prohibiting women and children from working underground by an appeal to Victorian prudery and gender roles, followed up with the claims that the only reason that women were behaving in this way was because the men around them were corrupting them and making them unfit to be wives and mothers. This was not the first time Lord Shaftesbury had done something like this. He also worked to get children out of work in many other industries, and worked towards getting hours reduced for younger people, as well as getting weekends off. This is often linked to the push at the time to ensure that children would be able to attend school, which was a massive social change because of course before this era it wasn't uncommon to only find schooling limited to the upper classes. Of course, this is a quick and dirty overview of the time period, there is a lot more to it, but as I said, this is a quick for the sake of simplicity kind of deal. So the real topic for the day is loosely based on that event, and indeed, several other times things like this have happened through history and even spanning to the current day, and that is judging the past by today's standards, a form of presentism. So in the earlier example we mentioned children in work, and how their work hours were being restricted by Parliament with the hope that it would get them to do other things, such as school and going to church. Now this prompts an interesting question, and indeed a bit of an economic conundrum. If a family is dependent on the labour of their children to ensure that they have enough money to live, is it then wrong to force their children to not work, but instead to go to school? Of course, by today's standards in the West, we would look on child labour as being abhorrent, especially since a child attending school is the norm until around the age of 16, with a few exceptional circumstances. So by looking back into history, we would probably be tempted to say that of course this was good, children shouldn't be working, they should be in school learning and getting themselves a better future so they won't be stuck in dead-end jobs. Now this viewpoint may be informed by the fact that historical working conditions, especially in things like the mining industry, were pretty terrible, as were many jobs in industry at that time in history, owing to very little health and safety information and training and things like protective gear and so on. This may have something to do with the fact that industrial machines were still relatively new, and thus people were less aware of the numerous ways that people can injure themselves around them. Machines not being made with safety concerns in mind, and a lack of other pieces of machinery to substitute human labour, and there's probably many other reasons as well on top of those. So in conditions where crushed limbs, falls from height, severed fingers, hair ripped from scalps and other medical maladies and the like not being that uncommon, of course by today's standards we would look back and say, no one should ever work in those conditions, especially children. So it's easy for us to make that judgment from the relative safety of modern life. But if a family is reliant on the income of children being willing to work in such situations, and I think it's important to point out that this was undertaken willingly. Indeed, the Industrial Revolution was responsible for a fair amount of population shift from the country to cities with people trying to find work. After all it takes is poverty and having a family to feed, and people will put themselves through some absolutely terrible things in order to provide for others. So the question here is it acceptable to force someone out of a bad job that they are willingly doing in the hopes that they will do something else that will make their lives better long term? Even if this means effectively condemning their family to a life of poverty and perhaps eviction and starvation as a result of that loss of income. This can be compounded even further if there is no supplement provided for that lack of income by the entity that then forced that person out of work. Is there even a definitive answer to this problem? Probably not. It is a problem that is being seen in the modern era in many third world countries where families rely on children to work, and then, because of schooling, which is in some cases mandatory, the family then loses income or labour because that child is now not free to work as many hours. It could be argued that this is only a temporary loss, an instance of delayed gratification, that the child with an education will do better after schooling and thus provide more for their family long term, and because more people are educated, hypothetically the country they are in will do better overall, thus leading not only to an increase in personal wealth, but a better quality of life for everyone. And as such, the problem of removing child labour is only seen in one generation, and is better for everyone long term, thus the inconvenience of removing it is in fact the correct change to make. Of course, it can also be argued that this change is detrimental to people's survival in the immediate, and so could potentially damage a family beyond repair with the possible death of a member owing to lack of income. It could also be said that the mandate for schooling over work for children is an infringement on freedom and people's rights to self-determination. Thus we're left in an interesting conundrum, and it's one that we will often answer from the point of view of modern experience and lifestyles which would side us with the abolition of child work. To bring this around even more to the modern day, we're seeing something similar with the debates around the likes of universal income and the raising of the minimum wage. Minimum wage laws ensure that everyone is able to earn a fair amount of money for their work, and it is supposed to ensure that anyone with a job will be able to afford to live. However, as minimum wage increases and technology gets better, we're increasingly seeing these minimum wage jobs becoming automated. This is a key point raised in regards to minimum wage raises in places like fast food shops. Why pay someone $15 an hour to take orders when you can replace them with an automated ordering machine, where the customer simply inputs what they want, the order gets sent to the kitchen, and then the customer moves on in the line. An automated number tracker tracks their order and calls it out when it is done, at which point one or two kitchen runners carry the order to the front for the customer to collect. This automation would drastically decrease the number of employees needed, thus reducing the running cost of such a restaurant massively, but it would leave thousands unemployed, and perhaps more importantly, potentially unemployable. This seems to be a bit of a third-rail topic for some on this sort of issue. Knowing what we know about things like IQ, how it is largely hereditary, and also how IQ is linked to workplace success and is the single best predictor for a person's potential future success, as we replace low-skill, low-intelligence jobs with machines, what is to become of those people who will, as a result, become completely unemployable because they are not mentally capable of anything more complex than basic fetching, assembly, or other highly repetitive low-skill jobs? This topic could be an entire hour-long video in its own right, and still have only scratched the surface of the concept, so I'll simply leave that one there as something to think about, and how it is in some ways a similar problem to the one previously laid out. To bring around another example of judging the old by the new, and how it can cause or create problems in understanding, I'd like to consider the religion of peace. You know the one I mean. The concept of this particular religion being peaceful seems entirely at odds with the behaviour of a fair number of its adherents, what with their mass murder of people that don't believe what they believe, and having been in more or less a constant state of one war or another since it was founded. Does this preclude this religion from being considered peaceful? Well, the answer is surprisingly no. The reason being that we judge the concept of peaceful by our modern definition of the term, and not by how that term is used in historical context to the religion itself. By modern standards, we would understand peace to mean something along the lines of no conflict, not disturbed or disrupted, something like that. However, when placed in context of a religion that has a mandate to spread itself across the land with the idealized goal of converting all people to its cause by any means necessary, the term peace does not mean to be free from conflict or struggle. The concept of peace in that context would be bringing about the total domination of the religion, at which point all people would live in submission to the will of their God, live by the same rules, and thus there would, in theory, be peace. Thus, it is absolutely a religion of peace. Its aim is to bring about peace by the conversion of everyone to its own tenets by any means, including the use of violence. It is therefore a misunderstanding of terms by judging the past using the definitions and concepts of the present. So there you have it. A few thoughts about presentism, specifically the subtopic of judging things in the past by current standards. And to end things, I think I'll leave off with a couple of quotes on the subject. First from Ashby and Lee, 1987. Historical empathy is difficult because it means holding in mind whole structures of ideas that are not one's own, and with which one may profoundly disagree, and not just holding them in mind as inert knowledge, but being able to work with them in order to explain and understand what people did in the past. All of this is hard because it requires a high level of thinking. And secondly, from Levesque 2008, this imaginative achievement in understanding how people in the past felt, thought, and acted differently from people today demands thoughtful effort. It necessitates the ability to view others from the past not as intellectually or morally inferior, but as equal and different, with their own belief systems and forms of life.